Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today, we are going to share park truck driver horror stories. First story. I took a drive late one night. What happened will haunt me for the rest of my life. Oh, before I forget, man, I was wondering if you could help me with something. The cashier, an acne-riddled kid who looked to be in his late teens or early 20s, looked up from shoving the bag of potato chips, 2 sodas, and a pack of Lucky Strikes into a plastic bag. For a moment, he just stood there, seemingly frozen in mid-action. Then he finally answered, "Yeah, what's up, man?" I let out a barely perceptible sigh. I'd been half afraid that I would be told to take a long walk off a short pier, to put it politely. Feeling relieved, I reached into my back pocket for what was there. You see, I seem to have, sort of gotten lost out here. I decided to take a late-night drive and ended up getting turned around on all these 2-lane back roads. I unfolded the map and set it on the counter so he and I could both see it before continuing. So, I was hoping you could point out on here roughly where we are, and more importantly, the way to get back to the main road. There was another long stretch of silence, and then the kid began to laugh softly at first, and then louder. "Dude, a paper map," he managed out between wheezes. "Are you for real? What year do you think this is? 1993. For my part, I simply let out a resigned sigh. I'd had a bad feeling I would be getting this sort of reaction from someone his age, and it looked like I'd been proven correct. Can't say I didn't see it coming. He wiped tears from the corners of his eyes and looked at me. "Seriously, bro, don't you have GPS in your car or something?" he asked. Immediately, I hooked a thumb over my shoulder, pointing out the glass entry door at the beige sedan sitting at the gas pumps. "Not in a Honda Accord from 1979, I replied simply. As he looked behind me out the door, I could see he wanted to make another quip, probably something about how I should buy a newer car or something. Thankfully, though, he kept it to himself. Instead, he leaned over the map and, still chuckling softly to himself, began looking at it. A few moments later, he snapped his fingers. "Ah, I still got it," he said proudly, then pushed his finger down near the middle of the map and looked up at me. "We're right about here, roughly 6 or 7 miles outside Placer." I leaned over the counter to see as he drew his finger away. "Here?" He nodded, and I pulled a pen out of my pocket, circling the area as a reminder once I left, then examined the map further. "Okay, so it seems like it'd take more than a few roads to get back to Interstate 5, right?" The kid nodded again, clearly already bored with the unusual interaction by the slightly annoyed look which had begun to cross his face. "Sure," he said simply, then placed my bag items on top of the map. "That'll be $14.50 for this, and $28.50 for the gas." I reached into my pocket and pulled my wallet out, withdrawing 3 20s and handing them to him. The register let out its trademark ding as it shot open, and he placed the bills in it before pulling out and handing me my change. Placing it and my wallet back into my pocket, I picked up the bag and folded the map back up. "Thanks for the help," I said as I turned to head out the door. "Yeah, no problem," I heard him mutter at me as I crossed to the front door and pushed it open. A small bell hung from the inside, handle jangled as I stepped outside and let the door swing shut behind me. The sounds of the refrigerator's humming and the fluorescent lights softly buzzing was replaced by those of a summertime forest at night. Crickets and cicadas buzzed loudly in the grass around the store, almost overwhelming the buzzing sound of the lights over the pumps. The sound of an owl hooting loudly echoed through the trees, followed by the loud call of what had to be an elk. I inhaled the clean air before heading down the steps for my car. Pulling open the driver's door, I took one last look around before dropping into the driver's seat. "So, did you find out where we are?" asked a voice from the passenger seat. For a split second, A wave of confusion and panic swept over me, and I spun in my seat. It was immediately replaced by a wave of embarrassment, amplified as my friend began to let out a deep laugh. Dude, were you in there that long that you forgot I was out here waiting for you? Not wanting to admit I had done just that, I shook my head. Nah, bro, not that. Just dealing with the kid and there was a major headache, he nodded sympathetically. Craig was one of my close friends. Ever since we'd met each other, we'd immediately clicked and had stuck with each other from that point on. And one thing we both loved to do was take late-night drives to nowhere, simply driving around with no destination in mind, listening to the radio, and occasionally sharing a joint one of us would buy. This is the first time we've ever gotten lost, though. I reached into the bag, pulling out the bottle of Mr. Pibb and handing it to him. Here, I said simply, before pulling the Lucky Strikes out and chucking the rest into the back seat. Pulling the key from my pocket, I slid it into the ignition and turned it, the car's buzzer sounding as the dash lights came on. A moment later, the inline four quietly rumbled to life with its traditional burble. Tearing open the packaging, I pulled a cigarette from the pack and stuck it into the corner of my mouth before reaching to push in the car's cigarette lighter. As I did, I shot a glance back towards the store and froze. A small shiver shot down my spine as I realized the kid was standing at the door and staring out at us. What the actual hell? Craig caught my gaze and turned to look himself. Dude, what the hell is his problem? I shook my head as the lighter popped back out, signaling it was ready to use. I pushed the glowing red coil against the tip of the smoke for a moment until it was lit, then placed it back in its slot. I pulled it from my lips and exhaled a cloud of smoke before answering, feeling more than a bit unnerved. I don't know, but honestly, man, that's more than a bit creepy. I shot one last glance. The kid hadn't even blinked once. He was just staring with an off-putting intensity out the glass. Come on, let's get out of here, Craig said, echoing the thoughts swimming through my mind. I put the car to first gear and eased off the clutch, the car beginning to roll forward. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him turn and shoot the bird at the kid as we slid out from under the lights into the dark. Prick, I heard him mumble. I turned the car left and began heading back the way we came. Well, the good thing is, yeah, I did find out where we are. I pulled the map from my pocket and handed it to my friend. I heard him fumbling for a moment, and then a small flashlight clicked on as he aimed it at the map. Dude, how do we make it almost as far east as Placer? He asked with a slightly astonished tone. Longer drive than normal, I guess, I answered, rolling down my window to flick the ashes from my smoke out. I shot a glance at the analog clock on the dashboard. 2:45 it read. I let out a small sigh. Great, Vanessa is likely worrying up a storm about us right now. Me especially. Ever since we'd started dating 5 years ago, my girlfriend had always been rather apprehensive about my habit of taking long, late-night drives when I couldn't sleep. She always feared I'd get into an accident, either with another car, wrap my Honda around a tree, or hit an animal. Most of the time, I'd come home to find her sitting up waiting for me, worry clearly etched into her beautiful sapphire eyes. I bit my lips slightly. Hey, you think I should text Vanessa and let her know we're okay? I asked Craig. I heard him let out a snort. Honestly, bro? No. I know the woman loves you to death, and I'm happy she cares so much, but she's got to learn you know what you're doing. Plus, you two need your space. It's not healthy how much time you two spend together. I flicked the remnants of the cigarette out the window and let out a snort of my own. It's called being in love, dude. You should try it sometime, I joked, causing him to let out a laugh. Nah, thanks, I enjoy being single too much. Shaking my head, I stared out the windshield as the headlights guided our way. I felt a slight sense of unease creep up on me as I watched the two-lane road stretch out before us, the moon in the sky almost completely blocked by the trees over our heads. I hadn't seen another car on the road for 2 hours at least. Well, what did you expect, Derek? You drove into the boonies. There's only ghost towns out here. Why don't you try driving all the way to Idaho next time? Shaking my thoughts away, I fumbled in the center console for a moment before pulling out a mixtape. A bit of music would help me feel better. I pushed it into the car's cassette player and hit play. A moment later, the pounding bass and synths of Dance with the Dead's That House began blasting from the speakers. Craig let out a whoop of excitement. Dude, yes! That's the kind of tunes we need for a drive like this. He rolled down the passenger window, sticking his head out the window to whoop and holler into the night. I shook my head, unable to keep from grinning at his antics. Friggin' goofball. The playful mood helped settle my mind, and I felt myself relax into the seat, the tension flowing out of my body and out the window. For a few minutes, that's how things went. The road stretching out ahead of us and then disappearing into the blackness behind us. The music blasting out from the radio and the soft roar of the engine in the background. I shot another look at the backlit clock. Now it read 5 minutes to 3. We should be at the highway in a minute. The thought released the last wisps of tension in my body and fumbled into the back seat for the bag, catching it with the tips of my fingers. I pulled my bottle of soda from it and, holding the bottle to the steering wheel, cracked the cap. I lifted it to my lips and took a swig, taking my eyes off the road for a split second to tilt my head back. I looked back at the road and nearly spit it all out onto the windshield. In the second I'd stopped looking, a figure had stepped out onto the road. Fucking hell! I shouted, jamming my feet on the brake and clutch as hard as I could. The rear wheels of the car locked up, and the ear-piercing sound of squealing tires filled the cabin. To my horror, the tail end of the car began sliding out. Oh, hell, no. For a few seconds, the world around us became a blur of shapes and colors, and I feared at any moment we'd smash into a tree or begin rolling. Thankfully, the car finally came to a stop with a screech of protest from the suspension. We were facing back the way we'd come. I could tell from the black lines on the road which had once been the rubber of my tires. I gripped the steering wheel with almost a death grip, my heart furiously pounding in my chest. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps. There was no movement in the car for a few seconds, before Craig reached forward and snapped the music off. Dude, what the fuck? He shouted at me, his face looking as pale as mine must be. I didn't say a word to him. Instead, I pulled up on the handbrake, ripped off my seatbelt, and practically kicked the door open. Stepping out onto the pavement, I stepped to the front of the car on unsteady legs until I was squarely in between the headlight beams. I looked around, first at the road ahead, then at the forest on either side. There was nothing there. What the? I turned and looked behind me over the roof of the car. The red glow of the taillights illuminated a few feet ahead, but beyond that, nothing but blackness. I turned again, looking out at the darkness beyond the branches. No movement disturbed the bushes and branches, and aside from the quiet hum of the car's engine, it was silent. I shook my head. Did I just imagine things? I shook it again. No, I know for a fact I didn't hallucinate. There was someone there. The sound of the car door opening made me turn, seeing Craig step out of the car. Leaving the door open, he immediately came over to me. You have exactly 20 seconds to explain to me what the hell just happened before I lose it, bro, he exclaimed. For a second, I fought to find my voice. Then I answered. Dude, I'm not crazy. Someone stepped out of the woods and onto the road. It looked like a chick. I thought I was going to freaking hit her. I realized I'd been holding in a breath and let it out, trying desperately to get myself to relax. Craig gave me a confused look. "You serious, man?" I nodded. He pulled the flashlight he'd used to look at the map from his pocket and flicked it on, aiming it first at the tree line on one side of the road, then the other. After doing this a few times, he turned back to me. "Well, whoever it was, they're not there anymore," his brow furrowed. "But why would a chick be out here in the middle of nowhere?" he muttered, more to himself than me. I still answered, "I don't know, man. It's freaking Josephine County. For as many good people live out here, there's also a bunch of weirdos." I heard my friend let out a snort of laughter in reply, but something had caught my attention. A feeling which had slammed into me with all the weight of a Peterbilt. The feeling of eyes boring into the back of my skull. I spun around, looking back towards the car and seeing nothing there. But the feeling remained, and I didn't like it one bit. Especially when the feeling came again, this time from the direction I'd just been facing a moment ago. Realization dawned on me, and I felt a shiver shoot up my spine, along with the flicker of fear. "Oh, shit," I whispered. Craig turned to look at me. "What?" he asked, seeing the look on my face. He repeated, "What?" I looked up at him, speaking with a bit of a weak voice. "Let's get back in the car right now." He didn't argue. Thankfully, he was already moving for the open passenger door, and I matched his pace as the feeling of being watched intensified, as if someone were rapidly approaching from the woods. Oh hell, I broke, first into a run, then a full-out sprint for the last 10 feet, tearing at the door handle and practically launching myself into the driver's seat. Slamming the door closed behind me, I jammed down on the door lock, seeing Craig do the same. He turned to me, his face hidden in the dark, but his voice giving a perfect mental image of it. "What the hell was that, man?" The tone of it gave away the fact he'd felt, even for the briefest of moments, the same feeling of dread and fear I'd had. You remember those videos of people driving on empty roads in the middle of the night, only to have someone step into the road and get them to stop? I asked. A sharp intake of breath came from the passenger seat before he answered, finishing my thought. "And then a bunch of people spring out of the woods trying to ambush them." Oh, hell no. My thoughts exactly. Time to friggin' leave. I released the parking brake, pulling on my seatbelt and jamming the car into first gear. The tires chirped as I hit the gas, and a moment later, we were accelerating away. As we did, the feeling of being watched rapidly fell away to nothing, and I allowed myself to let out a relieved sigh. We drove in silence for another few minutes before I finally spoke again. "I think we're in the clear, man." Craig let out a soft laugh. "Thank fuck for that," I nodded, then reached for the soda which had fallen, wedging itself by the parking brake. Snatching it up, I uncapped it and took another swig, the still cool liquid feeling amazing going down my throat. Recapping and dropping it behind me into the back seat, I let a laugh of my own. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, Craig, but I think after this I may take a bit of a break from late-night drives for a bit. This just got under my skin too much for a few moments, longer than I thought. There was nothing, and then he answered, "As much as that sucks, bro, I can understand. No problem at all." I thought I could detect a small tone of sadness in his voice, along with something else I couldn't place, but then I heard him sit up straight. "Hey, Jake," he asked, a bit of a concerned tone now etched into it. "Yeah." I heard him draw another breath. Shouldn't we be to the highway by now? Or at least see the lights of passing cars? I hadn't been fully concentrating on anything except the next stretch of road in my headlights, but at his words, I jerked my head to look beyond them. What the actual hell? He was right. The lights of cars and trucks flashing by on the freeway should be visible through the dark. I clearly remembered looking in my side view mirror as we'd turned onto the road from the highway, seeing the ever-present white and red glows zipping by both ways at close to the same distance we were now. That wasn't the case anymore. All I could see in front of us was darkness. Darkness and the woods on either side of the road. For a moment, I lifted my foot off the accelerator, letting the car slow down a little as my brain whirred. He's got to be mistaken. Hell, I've got to be mistaken. We just haven't gotten close enough to the highway yet. You know these old roads, Derek. They often end up longer than they first look. Feeling somewhat relieved by the thought, I said it out loud to Craig. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't completely convinced. And, for that matter, as much as I repeated it mentally to myself, I couldn't completely convince myself either. It was as if seeing the woman's step in the road had shaken me more than I'd first thought. Pushing back down on the gas, I shifted into fourth gear and watched the speedometer flirt with 55 miles an hour. For a few minutes more, neither one of us saw anything as we drove in silence. And then Craig let out a cry. There! A light! For a moment, a surge of hope welled up inside me, and I craned over the steering wheel, looking to see the highway. It was dashed as I saw it was only a street light, standing solitary guard on the side of the road like a sentry. Beneath it stood an old, worn sign which seemed to have been shot at many times with both BB pellets and actual bullets. I slowed the car some as it came towards us, so I could read it, and felt a wave of confusion fall over me. Golden, 2 miles. The fuck? Craig breathed out as he read the sign. It passed by us, the streetlight momentarily bathing the interior of the car in light and showing the confused, worried look on his face. How the hell did we end up by Golden? Golden is a ghost town, one which attracts visitors every year to check out the standing buildings. It was a mining town which had a population of a few hundred people, but once the prospects dried up in the early to mid-20th century, it became the ghost town it is today. Its biggest claim to fame nowadays was being featured on Ghost Adventures a few years back. Craig repeated his question, but I wasn't able to answer him. My thoughts were racing inside my head. There's no freaking way. Golden is miles to the north of Placer. There are no roads connecting the two areas from what I saw on the map. Not to mention, we've been driving in a straight line since leaving the gas station. I honestly don't know, man. I finally answered, my voice conveying how rattled I truly was. In the car's dark interior, I saw him put his head in his hands. I fumbled for my pack of cigarettes, pulling another out with slightly unsteady fingers and pushing in the cigarette lighter. A moment later, the turnoff of the ghost town flashed by on the right. I saw the dark, hulking shape of the church's spire rising out of the dark for a moment. Then it was behind us. The lighter popped out, and I pressed it to the smoke, lighting it and putting it back. I decided I needed to try and calm the rising tension that was filling the car's interior. Look, however we ended up here, man, the fact is we can't be far now from the highway. So, let's just keep our wits about us, keep calm, and when we get back to my place, me and Vanessa can have a good laugh over this. Sound good? I heard my friend take a deep breath, then let it out in a whoosh. Okay, yeah. That sounds like a plan. He let out a soft laugh, and I felt him pat my shoulder. Thanks, Derek. You're seriously a good friend. Glad I've got you, I nodded, then realized he may not be able to see it in the dark. No problem, man, I said. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m., only 5 minutes had passed since I'd last looked at it. And yet, it felt more like it had been 30. Time seems different when you're stressed. For a few minutes, there was only darkness, and then a light appeared in the distance. Huh, there we go, I exclaimed. I waited to see the sign for the on-ramp appear, and felt a shiver shoot up my spine as the sign for Golden flew by again. That's why? Craig didn't say anything, but I felt him stiffen in the passenger seat, showing he'd seen it as well. As the streetlight and sign disappeared behind us, a feeling began to creep up on me. Another shiver shot up my spine as I realized that it was the same feeling I'd had when we'd gotten out of the car. The feeling of eyes on me. My eyes shifted to the blur of trees on either side of the car, but I saw no one out there. The turn-off for the ghost town approached again. I heard Craig let out another deep breath. "Derek, pull over, please," he said simply. His voice was shaking, and as much as I didn't want to stop, I did as he asked, pulling over just before the turn-off. He ripped his seatbelt off, shoving the door open and stepping out. I watched him stride to the front of the car and stand there for a minute. He seemed to start shaking a bit, and I realized just how much this was getting to him. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door handle when I glanced at the clock and froze. The clock was still showing 3 a.m. The hands hadn't moved at all. A feeling of shock washed over me like a wave as I tapped it with my fingers to see if it was merely stuck. But it refused to begin moving again. Okay, what the actual fuck is going on? I whispered to myself. I reached into my pocket, fishing out my phone and turning on the screen. Like the clock, it too showed the time as 3 a.m. The feeling of being watched began to intensify, and I glanced at Craig standing in the dark before looking down, beginning to type a text out to Vanessa. "Hey, baby girl. Just wanted to let you know that Craig and I are okay. We're trying to get back to the highway, but have gotten a bit turned around out here. Do me a favor, and if I don't text you again in 15 minutes, text me back? Okay? I love you." I replaced the phone in my pocket. I knew I should have been more honest, but I was beginning to feel a little freaked out about the weird situation. I didn't want to worry her any more than necessary, as it would make me start to freak out worse. Pushing open the door, I got out and walked around, stopping near the front right headlight. "Dude, you all right?" I asked him after a moment. He didn't answer, but happily, he seemed to have stopped shaking. I repeated my question. When he didn't answer my second and third calls, I began to feel a new sensation creep up on me. A potent mixture of dread and fear. "Craig, dude, you're creeping me the fuck out. Please say something." He finally turned to look at me, and in the semi-glow of the headlights, I saw his face had gone a bit pale. He raised a finger and pointed, saying only a single word. "Look." My eyes followed where he had gestured, and I began to feel like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. The cigarette dangling from my lips fell from my mouth to the ground. Standing about 50 feet away, just inside the tree line, was a figure. It was drenched in gloom, but with a gasp, I realized it was the same woman who'd nearly caused me to wreck. "Oh, fuck me sideways, man." I swallowed, finding my voice. We should get back in the car, Craig." He nodded almost immediately. "I think you might be right," he answered, his voice wavering. Not taking our eyes off the figure, we slowly backed up until we reached our respective doors and climbed in. I didn't even bother pulling my seatbelt on. I just jammed the gear shifter into first and floored it. Dirt and gravel kicked out behind us, and the car shot forward onto the road. This time I didn't let up on the gas. I kept my foot hard down, the engine beginning to roar as I shifted into third and fourth. The speedometer reached 60 as I shifted into fifth gear, the feeling of being watched intensifying with each passing second. I prayed that I would see something, anything ahead of us. An intersection. A house. A freaking out-of-use payphone, for fuck's sake. And then my blood turned to ice as a light appeared ahead of us. The exact same one as before, with the sign underneath. My eyes flickered to the clock, and terror shot through me as I saw it still was frozen at the same time. "This isn't good, bro," Craig said from the passenger seat. I agreed with him, but didn't say it out loud. I kept my foot to the floor, the speedometer now hitting 80. The turnoff appeared again, and what I saw made me want to scream. The woman had gotten closer to the road, and she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her I saw others, the outlines of other people. Dozens, possibly more. They all stood, facing the road, watching us fly by, and then they disappeared into the rearview mirror. Fuck, I breathed out as the light and sign flashed by yet again. This time, the mass of people had gotten even closer to the road. The woman stood in front of them all, and for a split second, the headlights illuminated her. Another flash of ice shot through my veins as I saw the river of blood pouring down the front of her nightgown, one that looked to be decades old. "What the hell do we do?" Craig asked me, his voice steady, yet filled with fear, the same I felt. I just shook my head. "I don't know, man," was all I could say. The streetlight began to appear again when I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, causing me to nearly slam on the brakes in surprise. I fumbled in my pocket for it, seeing Craig look over at me. I texted Vanessa when we stopped, told her to reply back in a few minutes. "Now, I think I'm going to tell her to call the cops or something." He didn't reply, instead turning to look out the windshield at the approaching light. Flicking my eyes from the phone screen to the road and back, I forced myself to not look at the turnoff as we zoomed past the light. I didn't want to see how close those ghost demons, whatever they were, had gotten to the road. I flipped my finger, pushing away the lock screen and tapping on the messenger icon as the light began to appear once more. Vanessa's message automatically opened, and for a moment, relief like I'd never felt surge through me at the small bit of normalcy I had in my grasp. I froze. I didn't even look up at the road. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the single sentence, reading and rereading it. A wave of confusion passed over me. Enough, I spoke aloud. "The fuck?" Craig spoke up. "What? What did she say?" I didn't answer him. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, trying to understand, but it was like I was hitting a mental wall. I tried to think of something else as another thought came to me. But again, the same block was coming to me. As it did, a new wave of fear began to rise up in me. One for an entirely new reason than the terrifying loop flying by outside. The speedometer now showed we were doing 90, and then Craig spoke. "Can I ask you a question, man?" Ice filled every vein in my body. Not at his question, but at his voice. It was different. Gone was the fear and tension he'd had not even a minute ago. Now he just sounded flat. No, not flat. I couldn't tell why, but the way his tone was, it almost made me feel like he was smiling. Another shiver cascaded up my spine as I finally forced myself to answer, my mouth dry as cotton. "What?" He answered as we began to fly under the streetlight. "Are you scared?" For whatever reason, the question made me turn to look at him, just as the light whizzed over us. For a split second, the car's interior became illuminated again. My eyes locked with his. The light flew by. The turn-off appeared again. And for a moment, my eyes flicked up to see that the woman was right next to the road, bathed completely in the headlights. I finally caught a glimpse of her face. And then I was screaming, my fingers tearing at the door handle as the car swerved to the right. I saw a tree flying towards the windshield. I didn't think. I just forced the door open and leapt out. The ground rapidly flew up to meet me. Darkness. I woke up in a hospital room, a bandage covering my head and one arm in a sling. My chest felt like it was on fire as well. The first thing I saw was Vanessa, who, upon seeing me wake up, burst into tears and wrapped her arm around me. A few moments later, the doctor came in. He told me that I was a lucky man, Apparently, I'd gotten away with only a gash in my head requiring staples, severely bruised ribs, and a broken arm. Shocking for having dove out of a car at what appeared to be tremendous speed, he said, raising an eyebrow. Then he told me the police wanted to speak to me. He showed them in, and 2 officers entered, asking me many questions. I told them exactly what had happened, well, except for 2 small details anyways. They appeared to take my account seriously and promised to look into it. "We've had some reports similar to yours, sir," one of them answered tentatively. Then they told me how I'd been found. How a father and son who owned a gas station nearby had been out driving and had come across first my destroyed Honda, which had wrapped itself around a tree and then some, and then lying unconscious in the grassy ditch me. They didn't say who they'd been, but I had a fair idea who they'd been. At least the son anyways. That night was 3 months ago. I've been at home, resting and healing this entire time. It's given me plenty of time to think, plenty of time to process everything. I try not to think about that night, about any of it. I feel like I'll go insane if I do, especially after the police told me that they found nobody else at the scene of the wreck, only the passenger door hanging open. But I've had to, after receiving an email from an unknown address, one claiming to be the son, the kid I saw in the gas station that night. He told me things that his father told him he'd seen for years, that he didn't believe at all, until that night, when he looked out the door of my car. That's when he'd frantically called his father. As I type this out, I feel myself begin to violently shake, remembering the woman's face, indeed a ghost, as it flashed in the headlights. The look of horror plastered there as she frantically waved at me to get my attention. The same look the others must have had. Remembering turning to look at Craig as the light flickered over and seeing the smile on his face. A smile wider than any human being's could possibly be, filled with shark-like teeth as black eyes stared hungrily at me. The same shark-like smile the kid told me he'd been flashed as I pulled away. But mostly, I remember the single line of text Vanessa sent me. What caused me to rack my brain, trying frantically to recall my friendship with the figure sitting opposite me, and horror filling me as I realized I couldn't think of one single memory. What will keep me from ever taking late-night drives again? The 3 words that will remain burned into my memory forever. Darling, who's Craig? Second story. I am a truck driver, and I wish I'd never seen what I saw on the side of the road. As a trucker, I travel a lot, traveling to places I wish I hadn't been. As a trucker, I see a lot, seeing some things I wish I'd never seen. As a trucker, I experience a lot, experiencing things I wish I'd never experienced. But it is these things that make me who I am, and that is why I love the job, not knowing what I'll run into next. However, unknowing means you cannot foreplan how you will act in certain situations, and I do not make the right choices in certain situations. At all. I was in the UK a while back, taking a load up to the north of England. It was dark with few stars in the sky. I couldn't quite focus on the road for some reason, and kept fiddling with the radio. A few minutes past me doing this, I looked up and caught it right in my headlights. Sprawled out on the ground was a body. It wasn't moving. I pulled the truck into the side and climbed out. I approached the body slowly. I cautiously asked, "Are you okay, sir?" No reply. I walked over, about to take his pulse. I then realized there was no need. Blood was oozing out from underneath him, an obvious stab wound. It was clear to see the man was dead, and I knew that I had to call the police. I dialed 999 and explained to them what I had found. They said that they would send someone out to me and to stay put. A few moments later, I heard voice, shouting, and the sound of footsteps, fast footsteps, hitting the floor hard. I could make out the silhouettes of 2 men, one carrying a bag. I knew exactly what that was for. I sprinted back to my truck and clambered in, heart pounding. How could this be happening to me? That was the question thumping inside my head. The men had made it to the body now, one chucking the bag on it then running for his car. I hadn't seen them parked on the other side of the road. The second man ran over to my truck and started trying to climb up. I opened the door powerfully on his face. He cried out in agony and fell backwards. I did the only thing I could think to do. Drive. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and got out of there as quickly as I could, relieved that I had got away in time. The relief didn't last long, as I noticed headlights behind me. I was being chased down, and of course, he was much faster than me. The car behind me was gradually gaining. I knew I couldn't outrun him, but I sure could outsize him. I waited until he was right on my tail and then crushed the brake. I was flung forward in my seat. By the time I had recovered, he was gone. I did not know where or how I hadn't hit him. I saw it turning a few yards to the left and could only assume he had taken that. I put my foot down once again. I wanted to make sure that the other man did not catch up. I had been speeding along for a good 5 minutes when I noticed something in the middle of the road ahead. It was two cars that I recognized. It was the men. They had formed some kind of roadblock. 1,000 thoughts were spinning around in my head. Had I really stumbled across something that serious that these people needed me dead? Why would they not just attempt to get away? What do I do now? Earlier I talked about how in certain situations I make the wrong choices. Now was one of these times. I plowed straight through the block and didn't stop. The cops arrived at the scene and questioned me on what happened and how two cars ended up lying wrecked in the middle of the road. I told them what I had done. One man had been hospitalized and the other had escaped on foot. Detectives found fresh tire marks nearby and deduced that the man had got away by car. It turned out that the men were gang leaders. The two of them had killed the man I found on the side of the road, who was also identified as the leader of a gang. Third story. I'm a truck driver, and there's a reason why you should never drive on country roads. I lay on a table next to a roaring fire. My hands were bound, and I was surrounded by figures in black robes. The beautiful young woman, who looked like she was still in her teens, approached me holding a nasty-looking knife encrusted with jewels. "Please don't do this," I said. She flashed a wicked grin and raised the knife over me, holding her breath for a moment before she plunged it toward my chest. 12 hours earlier, I'd never been a big fan of trucks. Why I drove one for a living was beyond me. I think it started out like so many other things. You just think you'll do it for a while, and the next thing you know, 10 years have passed, and you're still doing the same thing. If this story was just about letting time slip away because I was too scared or too complacent to make a change, this would be a very boring story indeed. But it's not. There are many people who see things they shouldn't, or more to the point, who see things they wish they hadn't. Most of these people make a choice to bury the forbidden memory deep in their subconscious and never think of it again. They cope through any number of methods, including drugs, alcohol, or other means. If they can't cope with it, they leave a note, a grieving family, and a lot of questions. One of the reasons they choose not to tell anyone about their experience is being labeled. Crackpot, conspiracy theorist, lunatic, those are some of the nicer things these unfortunate souls get called. Then there's the censoring and blacklisting. Oh, it's all very subtle so as not to be discovered. But that doesn't make it any less real. My story started on a bright, sunny day when it seemed like nothing could possibly go wrong. That should have been my first clue. But how could I have expected any less? Driving down the country road with the window down, the sun shining, a balmy 80 degrees outside, the music blaring from the radio as I sang along desperately trying to stay in key. The fields were full of vegetables in their prime growing cycle. It was like everything was perfect for that one moment. I just wish that moment could have lasted. When my front passenger side tire blew, my good feelings were shattered. I went 10 rounds with the steering wheel trying to keep the truck on the road, but it was futile. Finally, having no other option, I yanked the wheel hard toward the left. It teetered on the edge of balance for a moment before the wheel bit into the asphalt, going 55 when the wheel dug and was catastrophic. The truck suddenly turned into a gymnast doing a routine on the mat. Fortunately, I had already delivered my parts for the day. If not, I would have worried about a drive shaft or a transmission flying through the plywood wall that separates the cab from the back of the box truck and turning me into a bloody pancake. I think I had enough to worry about as the truck flew through the air, taking me with it. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as the truck's momentum turned it sideways and started it rolling. I had no idea how many times it flipped. I just knew how hard I was praying and how tightly I gripped the steering wheel. When it finally stopped and settled, the truck was sitting back on its wheels. I thank God for small favors and for keeping me safe. I won't say I went unhurt. When you're flipping through the air, everything in the cab becomes a missile. I got hit by my water bottle, my bag of potato chips, my phone, even my lunchbox tagged me a couple of times. I was sure I would have bruises when I got home. After the truck settled, I turned off the engine, unbuckled my seatbelt, and slowly climbed out of the cab. My first few steps were tentative, making sure everything worked and nothing was broken. After I stretched and felt around for injuries, I took a slow lap around the truck. 3 of the 4 tires were flat, with the rear driver's side being the only holdout. There was dripping coming from underneath that seemed like different liquids mixed together. I decided it would be a good idea to get whatever I was going to salvage out of the cab quickly, just in case one of those liquids happened to be gasoline. I grabbed everything I could and went down the road 50 yards or so before setting the armful of stuff down on the berm. I sat down in the grass along the road and looked at the truck. I could see the top had been bent. It looked comical, as if it was leaning over and needed help to stand up straight. Thinking of that reminded me that I needed help. The road wasn't very well traveled. It was a Tulane country road I had been driving on for nearly an hour, and I hadn't passed more than a handful of cars. I dug through my pile of rescued items and found my phone. I really wish I hadn't. The screen was splintered. I tried to turn it on, but it was no use. I wouldn't be calling anyone with it ever again. I looked up the road and down, but all I could see were endless miles of corn growing in the field. I hadn't seen a house for a while, so I decided I would walk in the direction I had been going. I gathered what was useful and stowed it in my pockets. The rest went in my lunchbox, and off I went looking every bit like a kid walking home from school. The walk worked the stiffness out of my limbs and revealed whatever injuries I had were minor. It had been 20 minutes, and I was beginning to wonder if anyone lived on this road when out of nowhere a house appeared. It looked old and run down, but it was better than nothing. I turned up the long driveway, hoping the residents were friendly, and I wasn't about to have my torso redecorated with buckshot. Just then I passed a no trespassing sign nailed to a tree beside the driveway. I hesitated and considered turning back to look for the next house when I saw a man coming towards me on a tractor. It was already too late. He pulled up beside me and killed the engine. He was big, wearing overalls which he filled with a belly, but I could see bulging arms from a lifetime of hard work. His silent stare made me feel the most uncomfortable I had in a long time. "Afternoon," I said, waiting for some response. He continued staring as if I were some alien being that had wandered onto his property. I had a little accident back the road a couple of miles, and I was wondering if I could use your phone to call a tow truck. He leaned over and spit off the side of the tractor. "That's so," he said. "Yeah, unfortunately," I said. "A tire blew out on me, and I lost control." "Ah," he said. He eyed me up and down, making me feel more than a little uncomfortable, then started the tractor and turned it back toward the house without a word. Since I was still alive and hadn't heard any banjos playing, I decided this was his idea of a yes. I followed along behind the tractor as we headed toward the house. Not once did he look back to see if I was following. When he got to the front of the house, he yelled inside, "Darlene!" Immediately, an overweight, middle-aged woman appeared in the doorway, wearing a ragged dress with an apron over it. "This fella says he was in an accident down the road and needs to call a tow truck," the man said. "But the phone?" She started but was instantly silenced by a glare from the man. She hung her head. "She'll show you where the phone is," the man told me. Then he drove away on the tractor. "I'm sorry for any inconvenience, ma'am," I said. "It's no trouble," she said, looking up but not meeting my eyes. "The phone's in here." She stepped inside and held the door open for me to follow. The inside of the house was a stark contrast to the outside. It was clean and very well kept. I was surprised to see the portraits hanging on the wall had no dust on them at all. She led me down a hallway that ended in an immaculate kitchen. It was like someone had dropped it here straight out of a 50s TV show. I was so busy taking in the pristine condition of the room that I completely missed the phone hanging on the wall. She turned and pointed it out to me. I reached for it but wiped off my hands before picking it up so I wouldn't leave any marks. When I put it up to my ear, I heard a strange sound I couldn't identify but no dial tone. I clicked the receiver a few times but still got no dial tone. "It's not working," I said. She took the phone from me and tried to use it, but was unsuccessful as well. "I apologize," she said, gently hanging the phone back on its cradle. "The storm must have knocked it out." "What storm?" I said. She hesitated. "We had a storm last night and lost power," she said, avoiding my eyes. "It must have taken out the phones as well. Didn't you know about this before?" "We don't use the phone much," she said. "If you hadn't come, I might not have known it until tomorrow or the next day." "Wow," I said. "I can't imagine going days without using my phone. I mean, we don't really have that many people to call," she said, twisting her apron into a knot. "Maybe I should try another house," I said. "Their phone might be working." "I doubt it," she said. "But you're welcome to try. Our nearest neighbor is 3 miles down the road." The thought of walking another 3 miles held no appeal to me, but if their phone was working and I could get a ride out of here, it would be worth it. There was something odd going on here, and I didn't want to be part of it. In the back of my mind, the banjo players were tuning up. "That's fine," I said. "Would you mind if I use your bathroom before I go?" "Oh no, not at all," she said, brightening. "It's the second door on your left." Her sudden mood swing gave me the distinct impression she didn't want me here. I had no desire to be any place I'm not wanted, so no problem with me. I stepped into the bathroom and was once again impressed by the pristine nature of everything in the room. I felt almost sacrilegious using the toilet. When I was done, I washed my hands. As I glanced in the mirror, I saw a shadow move from the window behind me. I'd swear someone had just been looking in. I dried my hands and tried to put the towel back exactly where it was before exiting the room. I stepped out and nearly ran into the man. "Did you make your call?" he said. "Couldn't, the phone's not working." He said. "I was going to walk down to your neighbor's house and see if maybe their phone's working." "It won't," he said. "How do you know that?" "The phones are all on the same line. If one goes down, they all go down. Why not stay here for a while and try again later?" There was something wrong with his face. Suddenly, I realized he was trying to smile. The problem was it came across as super creepy. The other problem was I had no reason not to wait here. No reason I could put my finger on. No reason except the creeping suspicion in the back of my mind that something wasn't right here. But how do I tell that to a farmer who's half again my size and looks like he could bend me into a pretzel? "Sure, I'll stick around for a bit," I said, wearing my friendliest smile. We went back into the kitchen. His wife seemed startled to see me return. She seemed even more startled to see her husband smiling. I sat in a chair at the table. Okay, I thought. Just sit here and take a break. Don't make eye contact, and whatever you do, don't accept any. Would you like a drink? He said. Sure. My mouth said, making my mind say, dough. The woman brought over a glass of water, and I tried to just sip it, but it was nice and cold. I hadn't drunk anything in a while and didn't realize how thirsty I was. I downed it in one go. At least I kept enough self-control that I didn't give a big at the end. I sat the glass down on the table. Would you like another? She said. No, thank you. I was just thirsty from walking. What do you deliver with your truck? He said. Car parts, I said. I deliver to local repair shops. They both wore the polite, isn't that interesting looks that told me it wasn't interesting to them at all. Darlene rose from her seat. I should be starting supper, she said. Would you like to stay and have supper with us? Oh no, I don't want to trouble you, I said. It's no trouble, the man said. I really should be going. Where? He said. Why don't you have supper with us? And you can try the phone again after. That sounds great, but we're not good enough for you to spend time with, he said. That's not at all what I was going to say. I stood there, his glare burning through me. Of course, I'll stay for supper. His hardened facial expression melted into a smile. Great, he said. I'll go wash up in the upstairs bathroom, and you can use the one down here. I smiled, but my mind was screaming. What did you get us into? I followed him out of the kitchen and went into the bathroom while he went upstairs. I could hear the steps creaking under his weight as he ascended. I stood there holding the bathroom door, looking at my escape, the front door a handful of steps away. But where would I go? Back out on the road where he could easily find me? Maybe I could flag down a passing car before he knew I was gone. But then again, who knew when a car would go by? This wasn't exactly the interstate. In the end, I gave up and went into the bathroom to wash up. Not knowing exactly what that meant other than washing my hands, I decided to wash my face too, just in case. As I dried my face, I saw the shadow in the window again. I tried to play it cool and put the towel back on the rack, then slid over toward the window and darted toward it. The shadow was too quick and disappeared before I could get a look. I came back over to the mirror and stared into the tired eyes of a man in his late 30s who had traded his dreams for a secure job. You must be crazy, my reflection said. Why don't you crawl out that window and get away from here? I turned and looked at the tantalizing window. When I turned back to the mirror, my reflection was still there. You want me to take the risk of escaping while you sit nice and comfy in your frame? I said. Why don't you escape? My reflection glanced at the window, but didn't make a move toward it. That's what I thought, I said to the reflection. I stepped out of the bathroom and was greeted by the most delicious smell. I glided into the kitchen and drank in the smell of glorious food. What's that amazing smell? I said. Darlene jumped and turned around, brandishing a large spoon in self-defense. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, I said. It's all right, she said, her cheeks turning red. I'm not used to anyone coming to the kitchen until I call for them. Do you need any help? Help? She said, looking at me like she didn't understand a word. Yeah, help like with setting the table, I said. Oh no, I always take care of that, she said. But thank you. I went to the table and sat down, watching her glide through the kitchen with practiced ease. In no time, plates, glasses, and silverware appeared on the table. I noticed 5 place settings, including the one where I sat. I was about to ask about the others when she yelled, "Supper!" It startled me when I realized it was the loudest I'd heard her say anything. The man came through the door first, followed by a boy, maybe 11 years old. Next came a young woman in her teenage years. I quickly glanced away. The man's eyes bored into mine, and I suddenly found the pattern on the dishes to be the most interesting thing I'd ever seen. Darlene brought over a large bowl and a plate full of biscuits. 3 hands each grabbed a biscuit. The man took 2 and began to disassemble them on their plates, then poured the gravy over the remnants of the biscuit. "Well, what are you waiting for?" the man said to me. "Help yourself." I took a biscuit and separated it in half, then poured gravy over it that had chunks of meat in it. "What kind of meat is this?" I said, inhaling the tantalizing aroma. "Chicken," Darlene said, darting her eyes toward the man. "It smells amazing," I said, picking up my fork and diving into the gravy-soaked biscuit. "Aren't you forgetting something?" the man said. I looked around and found all eyes on me as my fork froze halfway to my mouth. I paused and set it down, then folded my hands as the others had already done. "Dear Lord," the man said, "thank you for the hands that prepared this meal and for blessing us with another day of life. Please help this fella to find his final destination and bless us to do your bidding." Then I opened my eyes, and everyone else was already devouring their meal. I picked up my fork, checking to be sure I wasn't going to be admonished for eating this time, and began devouring as well. To call the simple fare delicious would be an understatement. It was hands down the most incredibly tasty meal I'd ever eaten. I shot Darlene my biggest smile. "This is really delicious," I said. The man glared at me. The children shot curious looks at me. Darlene blushed and looked away. "What?" I said. "We're not big on compliments around here," the man said. "We do what needs to be done and don't expect a fuss to be made about it." "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, unsure if I was really being made to apologize for complimenting someone. The man grunted, and everyone went back to eating. I kept my eyes on my plate to avoid any further mistakes. When my plate was empty, I looked at the 2 remaining biscuits. "You can have another if you want," the man said. "Only if no one else wants it," I said. The man looked around the table. "It's still on the plate, ain't it?" "Yes." "Then nobody else wants it." I tentatively reached for the delectable lump of dough, waiting to see if anyone would change their mind. When no one did, I pulled it apart and doused it in the golden gravy. Within 2 minutes, it was gone. I sat back, feeling satisfied as Darlene cleared the table and did the dishes. I considered offering to help, but after the compliment speech, I was pretty sure that wouldn't go over very well. "Do you mind if I try the phone again?" I said. The man gave me a dismissive wave, which I took for yes, and I left the table only to be disappointed by the continued lack of a dial tone. "Still no luck?" the man said. "No." "Why don't you stay here for the night?" he said. "Oh no," I said. "I couldn't impose on you like that." "It's not imposing," he said. "We have a spare room." "I couldn't really." "Okay, how about this?" he said. "You stay the night. If the phone doesn't work in the morning, I'll drive you home. You do that." He smiled. "Absolutely. How can I refuse?" I said. "Great. I'll show you to your room." I followed him up the stairs to the end of a long hallway. There were 3 doors on the left-hand side and 2 doors on the right. We went to the last door on the left and into a beautiful bedroom. "Wow, this is amazing," I said. He looked around. "It's just a room," he said. "If you need to use the bathroom, it's across the hall." "Thank you very much," I said, holding out my hand. He grabbed it and shook it with a wide smile. "My pleasure." I waited until he left to collapse to the floor in agony at my hand that had been crushed by his handshake. The funny thing was I didn't think he was trying to hurt me. It was just his natural strength. I made a mental note to never anger this man. I set my lunchbox of belongings I'd brought from the truck on the bed and started going through them. I pulled out the small flashlight and set it on the nightstand. Next was the keychain-sized can of pepper spray. I looked at it for a moment, then stuck it in my pants pocket. I stuck the multi-tool in my pocket as well, then set the rest, mainly consisting of snacks, in the drawer. I wandered over to the window and looked out. It must have faced the back of the house because all I could see was a barn and a lot of field. The boy and the man were out there busying themselves with chopping firewood and throwing it on a pile. I didn't think too much of it since it was July and winter would be here soon enough. The sun was almost down, and with it my last thoughts of going back to the truck or trying to walk to another house. I'd heard stories about things that roamed the countryside in the dark. I'd seen my share of them and knew they were nothing to be trifled with. This place was nice, and the people were friendly in their own quirky way. I decided to go to the bathroom and get ready for bed. I opened my door and almost ran into the girl as she was reaching for the bathroom door. "Sorry," I said. "Would you like to go first?" she said, looking down. "No, you go ahead." She looked at me for a moment and grinned. I backed into my room and closed the door. I searched the room looking for anything to entertain me. There was no TV, no radio, nothing to distract me. In desperation, I opened a drawer and a Bible stared back at me. I shrugged. Maybe the good book will help me keep my mind off bad things. I flipped it open, stopped on a random page, and read James 1 verses 14 and 15. 14, but each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. 15, then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Great, I thought, slamming the book closed and tossing it back in the drawer. Just then there was a light tapping at the door. I went to it and opened it only to find the girl standing there just inches from me. "I'm done if you'd like to use the bathroom now," she said. "Thank you," I said. I darted across the hall and shut the door. 5 minutes later, I opened the door to go back to my room, but found the way blocked by the man. He stared down at me. "Enjoying yourself?" he said. "I'm sorry," I said, starting to sweat. "Is the room okay? Are you enjoying yourself?" "Oh yes, very much, thank you." He smiled and nodded, then stepped into the bathroom and closed the door. I glanced down the hallway, and there stood Darlene. She saw me and stopped, then went into her bedroom. I turned and went into my room, closed the door, and tried to shake off this eerie feeling that no one wanted me here, but they were all pretending they did. I laid down in the comfortable bed, leaving my clothes on. I'm not really sure why, I just didn't feel right taking them off. It didn't take long for me to drift off to sleep, hoping the morning would come soon and I would be out of here. I don't know what woke me, but the room was dark when I opened my eyes. There was moonlight beaming in from the windows, bathing the room in a pale glow. I sat up and looked outside to see a roaring fire in the backyard. I tried to get up and look, but someone was standing in my way. It was Darlene. She was standing beside the bed, staring at me. "Is everything okay?" I said hesitantly. She didn't answer, just stared at me blankly as if she were sleepwalking. I went to the other side of the bed, but someone was there too. It was the girl. She also was staring at me with a blank look. I tried to slide to the end of the bed, but the man and the boy were standing there staring as well. They were all dressed in black robes. I backed up until my back was against the headboard. "What is this?" I said, my eyes darting back and forth from one person to the next. No one answered. It was eerily silent. I was hard-pressed to hear if they were even breathing. My heart was beating so loud. I had a sudden flashback to a zombie movie where this same thing happened right before they ate the person. My mind was reeling. I was in full panic mode. I had no idea what they wanted, but I was sure it wasn't good. I thought about making a break for it, but they had me surrounded. I started thinking in terms of the weakest link. The girl was standing beside the bed. Surely, I could push past her before one of the others could get a hold of me. It would have been a good plan if the door was on the wall beside the bed, but it wasn't. It was on the wall at the foot of the bed, which meant pushing past her, then trying to get past the man and the boy before reaching the door. I was past regretting ever seeing this house. I was only concerned with getting out alive. While I was thinking about escape, they made their move. They all grabbed me at the same time. It happened so fast I had no way of avoiding it. I tried to pull away, but their grip was like iron. It was even impossible to yank out of the girl's grip. They held me down and tied my hands with rope. Then they lifted me out of the bed and walked me down the stairs. We walked through the kitchen and out the back door where the blazing fire awaited, surrounded by a dozen people dressed in similar black robes. We stepped inside the circle of people and stopped just before the fire. It was burning so hot I began to sweat. The man stood behind me and held me in an iron grip. Darlene stepped up to the fire, then turned and addressed the group. Once again, our Lord had provided a sacrifice, she said, making me go into sheer convulsions of panic. The man gripped me tighter, nearly making me scream with pain. He picked me up and laid me on a picnic table. All I could think of was a barbecue, and I was the prize pig. Darlene began murmuring in some language I didn't know. It was repeated by the rest of the group. Even the young boy was murmuring and looking at me with malice in his eyes. The sounds reached a fever pitch as they raised their hands and looked to the sky. I tried to take advantage of the moment and roll off the table, but the man's grip on my shoulders was like a vice. They reached a crescendo, and the sound died down as they lowered their hands and locked all eyes on me. I knew my time had come. Darlene turned toward me and pulled out a wicked-looking dagger that was covered in gemstones. She took a step toward me, then turned and handed it to her daughter. She took it in two hands with reverence, then held it by the hilt and started toward me. The once angelic face had taken on a menacing grin. She approached the table, receiving approving looks from all those around as they closed the circle in tight. "Please don't do this," I said. She flashed a wicked grin and raised the knife over me, holding her breath for a moment before she plunged it toward my chest. I was out of options. I did the one thing I swore I'd never do again. My hands darted up with inhuman speed and caught hers, holding the knife at bay. She struggled, putting all her weight into the downward thrust, but my hands had already grown larger and hairier. Her eyes grew wide as she drank in my transformation, watching as my arms, legs, and chest grew insanely strong muscles and became covered in fur. Her shock was magnified when I flexed my arms and shattered her wrists, bending them backward and plunging the knife into her chest. Her mouth fell open to scream, and I filled it with my claws, ripping straight through the back of her head. I grabbed her throat and ripped it out. She fell, blood pouring from her neck, her eyes frozen in a state of shock. The man tried to wrestle me back down, but I towered over him, grabbing him by the torso and throwing him down on the table, shattering it in his back. I grabbed his arms and legs and twisted them together, hearing the bones snap as I made him into a human pretzel. Darlene was next. She, like the others, had come to the realization that their little ceremony had gone wrong. I leaped in front of her, grabbed her arms, and ripped them out of their sockets. I then stabbed her in the heart with the sharp broken bones. Next, I grabbed the boy, opened my mouth, shoved his head inside, and crushed it with the snap of my jaws. I used my animal instincts to track down each of the escaping cultists and eviscerated them one by one. When the last one was dead, I slowly walked back to the house. My adrenaline bled off as the danger level dropped. I slowly transformed back into my human form and stood by the fire, looking from body to body as puddles of blood formed around them. As I walked past the man, he yelled, "You've taken everything from me?" I stopped and slowly turned, looking at his broken limbs twisted at unnatural angles. I stepped over and stood beside him. "You were perfectly willing to take everything from me," I said. "How many others have there been just like me? How many innocent souls cry out from the unmarked graves you buried them in somewhere in the wilderness after you inflicted unthinkable torture on them? You say I've taken everything from you, and yet you still draw breath. What happens when one predator meets another?" He tried to look away, but couldn't move his head. "One of two things," I continued. "Either they stare each other down and go their separate ways, or they fight to the death. You had a chance to let me go my way. You thought I was weak, and in the end, I showed you your folly." I stepped over and ripped the sacrificial knife from the dead girl's chest, stepped back over to him, placed it to his throat, and slashed across, watching the spray of blood drain what was left of his useless life. "Now I've taken everything from you," I said, dropping the knife as the light faded from his eyes. I went to the fire and picked up a piece of burning wood, then threw it through the kitchen window. I walked down the driveway and onto the road. The moonlight lit my way as the sound of crackling wood grew less the further I walked down the road toward the place I called home. You may wonder why I wrote this. You might say I was telling on myself, and the police might have a few questions for me. That's the benefit of people who don't want to believe those who say they've seen extraordinary things. The truth remains shrouded behind the mask of doubt and unbelievability. The real reason I wrote this is as a warning. Never take strangers for granted. You never know who or what they are.